and we lived about a block and a half away from the brand new hospital. I believe it's either Olive Vista or Olive View Hospital. Olive View Hospital. Um, and that's the one that, the wings fell down and right on top of the ambulances, so we couldn't use any of the medical supplies. That was fun. At the time, 6 o'clock, I was sleeping. I wasn't due to get up for another half an hour when it hit. And I'm wondering, looking back on it now, I think I knew what was happening, but I didn't know what was happening. It was just, you're in dead sleep, it's very, very difficult to get your hands around. But immediately upon it ending, several things happened, obviously, during that time. I remember I had this large dresser that took my brother and my father to bring into the room. It was just huge. And that sucker, the door slammed shut, and that sucker took 3 bounces in front of the door and fell down. Just fell down on top. So it was like, it was right between me and the door, and I couldn't get out. As soon as it happened, it ended. I sat up, and it was quiet, and I saw the dresser, and I just picked that sucker up and I moved it out of the way. So adrenaline kind of kicked in, opened the doors, ran down the hall, and immediately proceeded to slip all over the poker chips that had fallen from the linen closet out onto the hall, and slip and slide my way down to the to mom and dad's bedroom. And they were yelling to just stay put. So I'm sitting in the hallway, which I guess was probably a safe place to be. So they didn't know I was there, but yeah, I stayed there for about 5-10 minutes or so. And then my dad opened the door and saw that I was there, and had me get in bed with my mom. And mom and dad had a humongous window in their room that kind of overlooked the valley. It was up a little higher in the hills, and it overlooked the area. And I just remember looking out the window and the dead quiet. I mean, it was like no noise. It went from this torrential cacophony of noise and sound, and then it was just dead silence. And then you saw glows in the distance because it was still dark out. And then explosions. And then dogs starting to bark and howl. And it was the most eerie feeling in the world. It was like, what is going on? What is going on? And my dad came back in and forgot me, went to my mom and basically said, I want you to be calm. The house is not the way you thought it was before. The piano went through the wall. We had this divider back in the 70s. There's these dividers that would have in between 2 rooms. And the divider was just like a panel with feet on the bottom and on top, and you screw them in, so it's sort of and that we looked at that later, and the screw was like at a 45-degree angle from the foot of this panel. So we know that the house was doing this. That was crazy. The car went through the garage door, just bounced through the garage door. We literally shoveled out the kitchen with a shovel. There was nothing left of it except the weirdest thing. We had one unique glass. It was a tall glass. I would use it for like iced tea or shakes or whatever. It was big, tall glass, and it was a glass. That sucker, we put it on the second shelf because it was, it was only one. of all of them that we had. And afterwards, we were cleaning out everything, and only the middle part snapped off, completely intact. The middle part of the glass was still sitting in that middle shelf. The bottom of the glass was on the top shelf, and the top of the glass was on the bottom shelf. Very strange, very strange. Crazy stuff. I believe the chimney went down. The walls were still up, though they had the telltale signs of movement. One of the, I guess you could call it the coolest thing about the whole experience was we had lived there for about 2 years, and we knew our neighbor to the right of us, and we knew the neighbor across the street from us. But other than that, we didn't connect with anybody. After the earthquake hit and everybody's electricity went off and everyone's freezers started thawing out, our family was the only one with camping equipment. So other families would come over and use our stoves to cook up all of the meats and things so that at least they had food for a while. We lived on a corner, and on our corner was a porta potty. And across the street, they had hooked up a phone booth. And every week we would go down the street, and the National Guard would bring in water. And we had, our garbage bag with a liner in it, and they would throw in water. I remember going to the grocery store and it being outside. They couldn't have groceries inside, so they actually had aisles set up in the parking lot, and you would do your grocery shopping that way. And it was basically whatever they had. It seemed to go on forever. It just seemed to go on forever. And during all the cleanup that we did, I would, whenever the aftershocks would hit, I don't know if anyone else has talked about this, but you have that sort of like an aura or a preconception of feeling, and then you knew to brace yourself, and then you just wait to see how hard it is or how good it's going to be. And that stayed with me. I remember years later flying for the first time, and we went through turbulence. I was a wreck. I was an absolute wreck. And I couldn't figure out why it bothered me so much until I remembered about the aftershocks in the earthquake. The sound was the same, and the turbulence was the same. And it set something off in me. And I fly now like, not a big deal. But back then, it was really difficult for me to fly.
You mentioned about the piano.
Mm.
And I know your mother played the piano at church.
Yes.
She loved to play the piano.
Yeah.
That was one of the first things your dad told your mom. How did your mom take it?
She was a wreck. My mom is a fairly dramatic individual, and she also likes to be in control of every situation, and everything needs to be pristine. There has got to be no sign of anything that is not just perfect. And so she had a real tough time with it. She had her own issue in the morning where she would dress herself in the dressing room area. And she was up at 5:30, and she typically dressed in the dressing room because my dad was still sleeping. And for some reason that day, she decided to sit on the bed to put her nylons on. And as she was putting her nylons on, the earthquake hit. And she had 2 huge sliding doors that were mirrored glass that were just opposite from the marble countertop. And that's where she would have been had she been putting on nylons in the dressing room, and those doors both fell off and bounced against the marble countertop and just shattered.
So she was really injured.
Yes, yeah. Our neighbor actually ran out to get to her baby daughter in the room next door. And she ran right over, barefoot, obviously, ran right over all of the mirrored glass that was on the ground and severely cut up her feet. And unfortunately, or fortunately, we lived just a block and a half from the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
What we didn't know was that the wing had fallen down on top of the ambulances, and we couldn't get to any of the medical supplies, and the hospital itself was just not working. So they ended up going surface streets, zigzagging through town, trying to get around manhole covers, that gas lines that had exploded and everything, to get to the next town over, to get to their medical center to get her attention, because it was bleeding pretty well. We have, our neighbor across the street, her husband was out of town, so she was by herself, and she actually quit smoking 10 years before, and she started smoking and never knew away. So people were dealing with everything in their own special way. But our driveway ended up being the place that everybody would converge that first week afterwards, because that's where the Coleman stove was. That's where the Coleman lantern was. We had light there. We had heat there. We had everything you would need. Well, looking back on it, it's pretty odd. At the time, as a 14-year-old, you're pretty much into your own self and you don't really realize a lot of stuff. But yeah, we did get to know our neighbors really well after that. And we knew who we could count on for help or for anything at that point. So yeah, it was a really interesting situation because we were all in the same boat. Mm. And I think we're seeing that a lot now too. I just knew that pickings were slim. And I ended up a very weird, what do I want to call it? I'm getting old. I found things that it was like, I love this. And I would search it out from there on, and I would get some for years. Strained apricot baby food. And do you remember those space? They were like Tootsie Rolls, but they were the space. It was what they used in space.
Yes.
You remember those? I don't remember what they were called, but those two things, I picked those up because there wasn't much else in the snack department left. Yeah. And so I picked that up, and I got to the point where I would pick up. It always brings back memories of the earthquake and what we went through at the time. So baby apricot, strained apricot, baby food. He's always been very firm and very disciplined. He never really cracks. Rarely did he crack. Never showed fear at all. Like I said, when he came back in the room, he went straight to Mom and said, okay, I need you to be calm. Things are not where they're supposed to be. And it's a mess. And you're going to have to just deal with it. We're going to get through this. I won't put heavy things hung on walls around my bed. I won't do that. And I guess that's about it. I like to have my doors actually have a click, some sort of a fastener to them on my cabinets. I look for that, but if I don't have it, I don't go out and need it, but it's a plus. My husband, because he was down in Long Beach at the time, Yeah, and I asked him, I didn't know him at that time, but I asked him about the earthquake, and he said he woke up and the cuckoo kept cuckooing. And he woke up and wanted to know what was going on. And mom said, it's just an earthquake. And he said, oh, okay. And he went back to sleep. I do remember prior to the earthquake always wanting to be in one because they felt so cool. I mean, you just had the little rocking motion. And, ooh, this is kind of cool. Yeah, I'd love to be in an earthquake. Yeah. Changed my mind after that. It was freaky. I think that the sound of it is what got me more than the shaking, the deafening sound, and having no control and not feeling like you were solid if you were inside. Mm-hmm. Slept outside a lot for a week or two, but we had sleeping bags.
Yeah.
So we did that. I will say the one thing that bothered me a lot was about maybe a month or so after, all the looky-loos that would come up and the tour buses that would drive up, and the fact that we couldn't get out of our driveway mm-hmm. because there were so many people that would drive by and see us. We were fortunate. Our houses were rather new. But the house in back of us actually bounced 5 inches off its foundation. Nothing else was wrong with it, but it had bounced off the foundation. There was another house down the street that was a split level. And where the split happened, it split open. And then the top part of the other side went into the other house. So there was some damage around us, but relatively small amount of damage compared to some.